This video is sponsored by Describe. This year, I accidentally started another gaming group, but doing so gave me the tools I needed to finally read the very first 5th edition adventure, Mine of Phandelver, which I've been basically unable to do for almost a decade. Okay, let me back up. Back in May, my wife and I got dinner with a couple of local friends, and when the topic of D&D came up, as it inevitably will whenever I'm around, they actually had some interest in playing. It helped that there was a D&D movie in theaters at the time, and one of them had even played in a short game at a work function and really enjoyed it. This was before they'd seen the movie, and especially before Baldur's Gate 3 came out, because now, boy oh boy, they're even more excited. And so at that dinner in May, we started to earnestly discuss playing a game with the three of them, my wife and our two other friends, as the players. And they asked how character creation works, and I told them we would probably get together for a session 0 to make our characters, and one of them said, "Oh, that would be awesome. We could make a whole day of it. We could make our characters and then play for the rest of the day." And now I'm flashing back to a line from the first episode of Stranger Things.
The campaign took 2 weeks to plan. How was I supposed to know it was going to take 10 hours?
You've been playing for 10 hours?
Okay, 10 hours would be a lot. But I'm also thinking back to the stories we've heard about the early days of the Vox Machina campaign before they were streaming their game, where the players would gather for brunch and have mimosas and play for hours and hours well into the night. And look, I don't actually expect us to play all day. That's a huge commitment. But when you have that sort of enthusiasm from your players, you've got to capitalize on it. So yeah, we're going to put together a campaign. Now, as I said, this dinner happened back in May, and nothing's come of it just yet because we've been up to our elbows in housework. I actually made vlogs about that on my second channel. Go check it out up here if you haven't already. I'm going to try to use that channel to post vlogs and slice of life content from time to time. I haven't been great at updating it because we've been busy. But the point is, I haven't had the bandwidth to think about this game until pretty recently. But now that things have settled a little bit, I can start working on putting together this campaign. Now, the first question was to try to figure out what kind of game they might want to play. After all, we are in a bit of a boom time for tabletop RPGs right now, and while I do love 5th edition as a game, I wasn't necessarily totally convinced that it would be the right game system. So I explored my options. But I thought it would be extremely daunting to ask my friends who basically knew nothing about these games which game they might want to play when they have no idea what those differences are, and if I sat them down and explained all the different systems and what they do differently, they haven't played yet, so those differences would be difficult to imagine. So instead, at this dinner in May, I just asked what kind of fantasy stories our friends liked. And you know, they've got a Grogu decal on their car windshield and Sam Gamgee's potatoes quote on their kitchen wall, so I pretty much knew their answer before they said it. They said they liked The Lord of the Rings, and clearly they also like Star Wars. So that means heroic fantasy stories, or maybe even epic fantasy stories. So okay, that rules out Shadow Dark, which is a game I've wanted to try for a while once I can find the right group, but this would not be that group. And while I'm really excited for upcoming games like Daggerheart and Tales of the Valiant and the new MCDM RPG, those games aren't out yet. Now you might be saying, Mike, you just talked about how excited you were about the possibilities of the Pathfinder Beginner Box in some videos earlier this year. Why don't you run that adventure? Well, it's true, I am just starting to dip my toes into Pathfinder, and I do really, really want to run the Beginner Box adventure very soon. But that's also a game system I'm still learning, and so when I run it, I want to do so with friends who know TTRPGs well enough to pick up the slack when I need them to. But again, that is a game I'm hoping to run really soon, maybe early next year as well. But there is a system that's far more rules-light, and that is a heroic fantasy game that I've wanted to run for a while as well, and that's Fantasy Age. I played the Dragon Age RPG a long time ago, and while my lack of exposure to the video games kept me from fully investing in that campaign, I really like the game system, which Green Ronin has since published on its own as Fantasy Age. And I'm wanting to get back into it, and that would be perfect timing considering that the 2nd edition just came out this year. I haven't gotten my hands on that game yet, but I was hoping to try to buy it before this game and maybe run it for this group. But I also asked these friends whether or not they'd want to write physical character sheets or have a digital resource that handles a lot of work for them. And they overwhelmingly said that they would rather have digital sheets that make things easier. And as far as I'm aware, nothing like that exists for Fantasy Age, certainly not to the level of something like D&D Beyond. But unless you think that I'm only going with 5th edition because of the process of elimination, which left me with no other options, first of all, I do like 5th edition. I like it a lot. I have tons of resources for 5e that I still want to use for my games, like monster books and puzzles and other awesome stuff written for 5th edition by lots of different companies. But I also know how to tell these kinds of stories in 5e. I know some of you might not feel like it's the right system for that kind of game, and that's fair enough, but all I can say to that is, if I'm correctly understanding what my players will enjoy about tabletop RPGs, then I can do that really well using 5th edition D&D. And if I'm not properly understanding my players, then that's not really an issue with the system anyway. Also, again, since this initial conversation, a couple of these players have gotten hooked on Baldur's Gate 3 and have been picking up the 5e mechanics that way, so that will also speed up the onboarding process tremendously. But speaking of understanding my players, I then asked my wife what she was looking for from the game. Now, she does not have that same strong interest in fantasy stories, although she grew up loving Harry Potter and she's been really enjoying the recent God of War video games, so I do think that she'll still enjoy that same epic fantasy / heroic fantasy tone. But I've actually played D&D with her before, and she was actually a little bit on the fence about playing again. So I asked her, well, what did you not like about that campaign? Or if that's not the right way to think about it, then maybe a better question would be, what was it about that experience that's holding you back from another campaign? And so we talked about it, and she basically landed on the conclusion that she didn't like the idea that the story was just going to go on endlessly. She likes being able to finish things. She doesn't like binging 2 seasons of a TV show and then having to wait week to week for new episodes of a new show. She likes things to be complete and for a destination to be in sight. And you know, as I write this script, she had just recently finished the main story of God of War Ragnarok, but there's a ton of post-game content that is not available to engage with until after the main quest, and she was going around trying to get 100% on each map region because she really likes to get 100% if she can, but she really doesn't like the idea that all this stuff was completely gated off until the story was done. She says it basically feels like she was tricked into playing another, less emotionally investing video game right after she finished the game she actually wanted to play. And watching her go through that experience has also been extremely educational for figuring out what kind of campaign she would enjoy. So it seems like the best option would be a short adventure rather than one of these long 10 to 15 level long campaigns. And because all 3 of my players seem to favor heroic fantasy, then we'll choose an adventure where the players have a chance to save the day and be heroes rather than something with a less clear-cut objective. So I decided now is finally the time where I'm going to run Lost Mine of Phandelver, the very first starter set adventure for 5th edition D&D. It's the perfect fit. It's a short, self-contained adventure, and I can basically tell the players this is like a movie or a season of a TV show. We'll tell this one story, it'll run a few sessions, and then you'll level up a few times, and then we'll take a break. And then we can decide if you want to come back and play another game with these same characters in the same world, or whether you want to roll up new characters for a different adventure, or play a completely different game system, or we can bring in more players, or you can just tell me that this hobby isn't for you, and that's all okay. Honestly, most ambitious campaigns, hoping to run for ages, fizzle out around level 5 anyway, so if we plan to end the game when we get to level 5, but with the door left open for future adventures, that just seems like a really solid option for making everybody happy. Now you might be wondering, Mike, if you're going to run a D&D starter set adventure, why not run the most recent one, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle? Well, there are a few reasons. The first 2 are related to the fact that this campaign might continue after the break, and if we start with Lost Mine of Phandelver, there are actually 2 other adventures linked to that setting. The first is the adventure from the Essentials kit, Dragons of Icespire Peak. And while I'm sure I'd have to make some adjustments, that would be an adventure that I could probably run after Lost Mine. But Lost Mine was also just expanded into a longer adventure called Phandelver and Below, The Shattered Obelisk, which just came out a couple of months ago. Now, I don't know yet whether this group will even want to run more adventures with these characters after they finish this first arc, but if they do, then it is nice to know that there's a longer campaign available to check out if they're interested. I also have no idea if Phandelver and Below is any good. This video is not sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. I don't have a copy of the book. It might be terrible, but it would still be nice to have the option to go into a larger adventure, even if that adventure winds up needing some work. But finally, and this is truly the biggest reason, I've had the Phandelver adventure for literally 9 years at this point, and not only have I never run it, I've never read it all the way through. So this finally gives me a method to conquer the issues I have reading published adventures, and an excuse to conquer my D&D FOMO, and check out this adventure that nearly all of my fellow players and GMs have already run or played through, and that pretty much all of them seem to have really enjoyed. Because here's the thing. I've mentioned this before on the channel, but I have a really hard time sitting down and reading through a published module. I'm an experiential learner. I learn by doing. And actually sitting still and reading D&D products can be a challenge if I can't at least visualize how something will go when I'm playing, or if I have a specific goal. It's easier for me to read player character options than a setting book because character options generate character ideas. Reading a setting book is easier than reading an adventure because a setting book can sometimes be passages of lore, but other times it offers enough creative inspiration to get my wheels spinning about adventure ideas. And reading a published adventure it's just a real challenge for me. I've seriously bounced off of Lost Mine of Phandelver so many times over the past 9 years. But there are exceptions. Like, speaking generally, it's easier for me to read any RPG product if I'm taking notes on it for a video, because having a specific goal encourages me to evaluate the product, which helps me process information. It's weird, but it helps. But at least in the case of adventures, there's something else that helps a lot. Knowing anything about the players who I plan to run this for. Then I'm no longer reading these passages in a vacuum. I can imagine how some of my players might potentially respond to specific NPCs or scenarios, how to dramatically reveal certain monsters, and what kind of story beats to change to make the campaign as engaging as possible. The funny thing is, once I read an adventure with some players or their characters in mind, I don't necessarily have to stick to that idea. I'm not locked into these concepts in my mind. I might have an idea for a scene or a sequence that will work really well with the player, but if that sequence doesn't happen once we get to the campaign, I don't get butthurt. I might have a cool approach for how to tie a specific character into the campaign, but if the player doesn't like that idea, I can actually still adjust my plans and move on. Starting with players in mind just breaks through whatever barriers I have in place and helps me retain the text and interact with the product. Heck, I don't even need to run it for the same characters or even the same players that I had in mind when I read it. I can come back to the adventure with a totally new group and still feel like I have a handle on how to handle it, because I've overcome that first hurdle. In fact, for a while now, I've wanted to make a video testing this approach to its absolute limit. At some point, I want to generate a sample party of player characters just as an example to have in my head, and then keep those characters in mind as I read an adventure for the first time, and see if it works, see if it sticks. Can this approach work if I don't know the players? Maybe someday I'll try it for a video. I don't know, let me know if you think that would be interesting. But in this case, I have a vague idea of what classes the players might play, and really no sense of what those characters will be like. I mean, my wife is going to play a leveled down version of the same cleric she played in our last campaign, but beyond that, I just gave 2 of the other players a bare bones rundown of the classes, and one of them wanted to play a bard, and the other, so far, initially likes the idea of a warlock. That's honestly not that much to go on. You wouldn't think that that would help me very much. But I do know these players. I know what kind of stories they like, so when I have an idea while reading the adventure, I can picture how the players might react to that idea. Now, I don't know if I'm right or not. You can't even really begin to guess how your players will react to your nonsense until you've played with them for a long, long time. But even just knowing the players still opens up the door for specific ideas. For example, very minor Lost Mine of Phandelver spoilers here, but later in the adventure, the characters are expected to encounter a spectator, a beholder-like monster that was originally summoned to supervise the workers in the mine. In the adventure, the spectator doesn't understand that the mine is no longer operational. And in reading that, I had the idea to characterize the spectator as basically a horrible, monstrous, murderous middle manager, repeating back all the toxic nonsense we've all heard in our mundane office jobs. For example, if the players try to run, the spectator might say, "You can't leave, your PTO has yet to be approved." If the players attack it, the spectator might say, "Hostile work environment." And my wife and one of the other players both work in HR, so I think they're going to get a kick out of that approach to that monster. To show you how much of an impact just knowing who your players will be can help with prepping an adventure, I want to take you through my to-do list for this campaign. First, they have actually mentioned another friend who is interested, so we'll recruit him to the game as well. And now that they've all gotten hooked on Baldur's Gate 3, I might ask which classes they're leaning towards now that they've actually experienced the game to see if their answers have changed. Now, we'll still make characters all together in Session 0, but I'm very curious what they're leaning towards now that they are a lot more familiar with the mechanics of the game. During Session 0, I'm going to give my players a choice of whether they want to play in this adventure in the same world as the D&D movie and the Baldur's Gate video game, or whether they want to play in the world of the Vox Machina cartoon, which they haven't seen yet, but I don't know, I might try to get them to watch the first episode or two and see what they think, or whether they want to play in a totally original world of my own creation, because I think that they would like any of those options. So I'm going to do some prep for all those possibilities of putting the adventure into Taldore, as well as putting it into my own homebrew setting. Honestly, my guess is that they're going to want to go with the world of Baldur's Gate, since that's the one they're already familiar with, and that is the setting the module was already written for, so that will be easier for me as well. But it never hurts to ask, and I think a video about adapting Lost Mine to Exandria could still be really fun. Because these are new players, and my wife has only played remotely via Theater of the Mind, I want to give them the full experience, so I'm going to go all in on battle maps and minis. Not like Dwarven Forge, but homemade stuff. I haven't used battle maps in years, so I'll probably try a couple different techniques for each map just to see which might be the easiest and which might be the most fun. I'll also be using miniatures for the first time in a long time, which means I need to fill in some gaps in my miniature collection to cover the monsters that appear in the adventure, but that I don't have a way to represent at the table, at least not one that I'm happy with. And speaking of monsters, since this adventure first came out, we've gotten so many cool new monster books from other publishers, so I want to go through some of the books that I've got and see if I can either replace monsters with more dynamic stat blocks, or supplement the adventure with cool side monsters that can keep things interesting. But the goal is just to make fights more interesting, not necessarily to make them more deadly. After all, these are new players, so I can't go overboard on lethality. But I think we can have a non-lethal fight while still curating a more dynamic lineup of monster stat blocks from various other 5e publishers. Speaking of adding side monsters, I've been meaning to try out a new approach to random encounters, and this adventure gives me the perfect excuse to finally take a look at my random encounter tools, so limited as they are, and flesh out a new approach. Particularly because I know I'm going to be running this game for new players, that perspective will hopefully keep my focus on what's most important with a random encounter system. Which is to say, I don't want to focus on a super crunchy system that would appeal only to players who have been playing 5e for a long time. Although the system I have in mind would also still be a ton of fun for veteran players, if I can get it right. Returning to the subject of giving these players the full D&D experience, I want to use handouts again. It's been so long since I've made handouts, but I used to love doing it, and every time you give players a handout, especially new players, I find that they get so excited. They love having something that feels like an artifact of the world of the game, but that they can actually interact with. And since the last time I made handouts, I've heard about some new approaches that I really want to try, so that will be fun to experiment with. I also picked up some items off of Etsy to represent some healing potions. I'll be really excited to share those with the players, since those are another prop that the players can hold and interact with, but that can also make the game easier for them. I also want to give the players magic item cards, but they're playing on D&D Beyond, so how will that work? Well, I have an idea that I've wanted to try for a long time, a way I can format the cards while still encouraging them to use D&D Beyond, and now feels like the perfect opportunity to try to deploy it for a game. Something else I want to try, which totally might not work, but I want to try giving the players quest cards for when they get a new quest. After all, these players have all played a ton of video games where it's much more common for you to have some sort of milestone or compass marker to keep track of your quests. But I think that this would only work if there were also blank cards, so the players could fill them out themselves when they decide to do a quest that they just come up with on their own. And then either the players could write down the reward the NPC promised to them, or I could write down a mechanical reward that they'll get, like they'll level up, or they'll get some new gear or whatever. There's a great Matt Colville video about rewards that can help inform this subject as well. I also used to use initiative tents, which, if you're not familiar, are little pieces of paper that you hang over your DM screen to represent the initiative order, so players can at least know who's going after them. But the back of a tent can also have useful information about armor class, passive scores, and a few other things that I need to decide on. So I want to make some new initiative tents with spaces for the information that I feel like I'll need. As you've noticed, some of these tasks have less to do with prepping this specific adventure and more to do with the fact that I am returning to in-person play for what is basically the first time in almost 4 years. So while I used to have solutions for some of these aspects of the game, maybe my sensibilities have changed, or I think about that part of the game differently now, or I just want to look at it a certain way to help immerse the players, or, in some cases, my old methods have just deteriorated. For example, I don't have any of my old playlists of D&D music anymore, so I need to put together new playlists and figure out the best way to share that music at the table. However, some things I need to do are specific to this adventure. Mine of Phandelver takes place in the same setting as Dragons of Icespire Peak, and obviously the same place as Phandelver and Below. And those both might become future adventures for this group, so I would like to sit down and read through those and look for things that I can potentially foreshadow in this campaign. However, I also need to make a change to the Mine of Phandelver adventure. I mean, there are tons of resources out there for changes and enhancements, and, I might scope some of those out after I run the campaign, or make my own videos about my own changes for the next time I run it. But just from reading the adventure through once, I already know about one change I kind of have to make. Because I sort of hate the ending of the adventure, and so I really need to figure out a better one. Oh, and because we're planning to get together for a full day of brunch and drinking and dinner and games, I want to look up some recipes that help enhance the game experience, maybe that can tie thematically into aspects of the campaign. I think that'll be a ton of fun. And I'm going to make videos about every one of those topics I just covered. Now, you won't be getting most of those all at once. They're going to be spread out. I am hoping to run the game in the next couple of months, so the prep does need to happen pretty soon. But what I'm planning to do is document all these experiences, make videos to expand on my thoughts about them, and put those videos out across the scope of 2024, covering a lot of these topics. But I want to be clear, I'm not waiting until all these videos are done before I run this game. Do you hear me, future Mike? Don't wait to make these videos before running the game. Just document the process, take lots of notes and record vlogs, run the game, and then put out some videos. I also want to be extremely clear, a lot of the things that I'm describing are optional. They're cool. Well, hopefully they're cool. I haven't run the game yet, but I'm hoping it'll be cool. But they're all just optional. Like I said, I haven't run in-person games in several years, but I still run virtual games all the time, and we either play on a virtual tabletop or we use Theater of the Mind, which is primarily what I was using for my home games for, honestly, probably a year or two before we all had to start running virtual games in 2020. And even when I wasn't running Theater of the Mind games, I still had pretty simple solutions to a lot of these topics, things that would work just fine if I deployed them today. So as I make the videos in the next couple of months about this game and the things I want to try as I prepare to run it, maybe I'll also include details about how I used to handle these subjects back when I was running these types of games. Then, not only will you get to see the new method I'm hoping to use, but you'll also get some tips about another way I used to do things, and you can decide for yourself what you want to do in your own games. For example, you might not have the amount of free time I do to dedicate to prepping a game, and so trying to come up with additional content is a huge challenge. I mean, trying to find maps with awesome descriptions, and cool monsters with awesome descriptions, and memorable NPCs with awesome descriptions, and legendary magic items with awesome descriptions. I mean, where are you supposed to find awesome descriptions at all? Describe is an ENnie award-winning team of writers who work tirelessly to produce literally thousands upon thousands of wonderful scenes that can help bring your game to life. They've got everything you need, from descriptions of NPCs to add to your colorful cast, to evocative descriptions of spells being cast, to terrifying descriptions of monsters who will put you in a cast. Describe has it all. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. So that's the plan. I'm going to run Lost Mine of Phandelver soon, and I'll document some of the behind the scenes leading up to it and start putting those lessons into videos. Not right away though. I have a lot going on. You'll see more about that in a couple videos from now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, hit the like button, otherwise it doesn't count. If you want to see more videos, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, otherwise it literally doesn't count. Like, you're a lot less likely to see them. If you want to see me make other awesome stuff, support me on Patreon. If you want to see other people talking about other awesome stuff, sign up for my Discord. We've got a really lovely community there. Follow me on Twitch to catch my live streams. I just got back from my honeymoon by the time you're seeing this, and I'm going to try to go live a couple more times this month. And sign up for my newsletter to catch my updates when I have some to share. If you're thinking about running a pre-published adventure like Lost Mine of Phandelver, make sure to check out my video about how to read pre-written text aloud for your table. It's very important. Until next time, play fair and have fun.